And again, how do you describe toxics targeting?
We're an environmental database firm in Ithaca, New York, but we've been very, very actively involved in shale fracking, fossil fuel infrastructure debates, and we've really played a leading role in organizing and educating citizens so that they can participate in these momentous decisions.
So let's just jump right to it. What's your response to Governor Cuomo's proposal to permanently ban fracking?
Well, the concept is lovely. We've been encouraging him to permanently prohibit high-volume hydraulic fracturing. Unfortunately, when you look at the language of his proposal, it's fatally flawed, it's unacceptable, and he's going to endure brutal criticism because he, again, has not fulfilled his promise to prohibit high-volume hydraulic fracking. He's only going to prohibit hydrofracking using water. And as everyone in the Southern Tier knows, literally days after the original prohibition was adopted in 2015, gelled propane fracking was proposed in Barton, New York. That's fracking with propane, not water, so it is not specifically prohibited under the final supplemental generic environmental impact statement. And that's how come we're just going to be telling the governor, you got to prohibit all types of fracking, and until you do that, you're not keeping your word.
I would imagine some people will be like, well, what do you mean? I thought they already banned fracking. In what way is the existing ban not a permanent one?
So it was simply a decision not to allow it based on all the concerns that we had raised for literally 5 years. And the problem is that that could change almost any time, any day, even under the current administration. So it's good for what we got up until now. There has never been a single production well anywhere in New York that's been fracked. The problem is that the definition of high-volume hydraulic fracking that was originally adopted by Governor Cuomo is just totally inadequate. Plus, it's so shockingly badly drafted, it isn't really clear what he's referring to. So if the governor is going to adopt high-volume hydraulic fracturing prohibition, permanent, totally don't allow it, it can't be connected to the language in the supplemental generic environmental impact statement. It's got to be a standalone piece of legislation to just make sure that this can never be allowed in New York. That's what we want. That's what activists have been pressuring him to do. But the legislative proposal is just shockingly inadequate. It's unacceptable, and we're going to start phone banking very shortly to make sure that any prohibition that's adopted absolutely is bulletproof, no wiggle room, no openings, no loopholes at all, including prohibiting gel propane fracking.
Again, when this debate was more raging before the state came out with its decision with the ban, a lot of the people who favored fracking in New York pointed to what they called the success of Pennsylvania. What do you have to say in regard to that?
Well, we now know that prohibiting shale fracking in New York was an absolutely good thing to do because Pennsylvania allowed it in 2008, while New York said we have to make sure it's not going to harm public health and the environment. And so Pennsylvania is a cautionary tale. They didn't have the regulations. High-volume hydraulic fracking turned out to be a lot more dangerous than the industry told the public about. And so based on Pennsylvania's own data, there have been more than 300 drinking water incidents confirmed by Pennsylvania authorities associated with both conventional oil and gas drilling as well as shale fracking. So this is what New York avoided. It was not Governor Cuomo taking the lead. It was citizens in the southern tier who took the lead. And this is why New York protected itself from shale fracking. That's why I applaud the concept of a permanent shale fracking prohibition, but it's got to be bulletproof. It can't be limited to hydrofracking. It's got to include gel propane and all the other hydraulic fluids that could be used to crack the shale.
Here's the last thing is, when it was first announced, and I think everyone understood that it was Governor Cuomo's decision, but he seemed to put on this dog and pony show with that, webcast, satellite, meeting, and he kind of put it on the head of the State Department of Health to make the announcement and the conclusion. And at the time, it was basically sold as, well, we don't know enough yet. We need to study the health effects more. I'm not sure anyone on either side of the issue necessarily took them at their word at that point, but has there been any indication that you know of that either the Department of Health or any other state agency has actually pursued additional study on the potential health effects of fracking?
So you're absolutely correct that this decision was really a political decision as much as it was a scientific and a technical decision, because we had documented so many problems with oil and gas extraction, and we knew that New York didn't have adequate regulations, and it didn't have financial surety and strict liability, and you have to have your day in court if, heaven forbid, your property, your health is impacted. And so the governor didn't take the lead. He was pushed into this. He originally wanted the economic benefits of shale fracking, and he said that right here in Binghamton when he was running for office, and we crushed him. We begged him not to do it. He persisted through his entire first term, and then ultimately he faced the political reality that the pressure was brutal, it was building, it was insurmountable, and that's when he threw in the towel. And then he tried to make it seem like, the health commissioner, Howard Zucker, made the decision, and we're going to be on the side of safety. But the bottom line is activists forced the governor not to allow shale fracking in New York, and now we're going to put more effort into making sure that any permanent fracking prohibition is absolutely airtight and has to include gel propane, because the governor only responds to pressure in these matters.
I'm good. Is there anything else you'd like to add? I didn't think to ask.
No, thank you so much for your coverage of this issue from the very beginning. New York is the only state that has ever prohibited shale fracking where there's shale to frack. So this is now spread from coast to coast. The problems are unbelievable, including in Pennsylvania and in so many other states. Earthquakes, you name it. And New York was able to avoid those calamities because of the press, because the press delved into these very complicated issues, and there was an opportunity to get past all the promises and all the, hopes and dreams, to get down to the nitty-gritty. And that's how come the fractivists were so effective, because they were able to look at the government's own data and say, wow, look at all this drinking water that got polluted. Look at these people that had to run for their lives. Look at all these regulations that were never enforced. We can't possibly go forward. And to this very day, that's how come New York has been protected from shale fracking.